Well, most people your age, down to the current high school, secondary students, don't know much about a residential school. College age and university age also don't know anything about a residential school. So I'll start with the basics. The schools were first opened up by missionaries that came to Canada in the 1600s. And they probably, the buildings themselves are not around. And they started in the eastern part of Canada, probably before it was Canada. But the part that I lived in is the era where the government joined in with the churches. I call it a collusion. My school in particular, which is the Shingwak Indian Residential School in Sault Ste. Marie, was first opened in 1833, contrary to what the government's documents say. And that's because our Chief Shingwak wanted a school whereby his Ojibwa children could learn the white man's ways and they could learn our ways. It was a two-row wampum, which means that they traveled together equally. And it's often depicted in a piece of embroidery or beadwork where the two ships are always together walking, going side by side. One never leaves the other. They travel together and they learn from each other. And this is an agreement that is maybe not verbally made, but spiritually made. And it's been carried out in governance in a lot of different ways. So, and Chief Shingwak of Garden River, who's adjacent to Sault Ste. Marie, that was his goal, but he died before he could see it accomplished. So his son took up the cause along with a missionary. And the missionary, believe it or not, had a similar goal. They were those two boats in the wampum picture, traveling together. He believed in the cause too. But once his church got into it and messed things up, he left and went to Vancouver and never came back east again. So he saw what the churches were doing in the government, so he thought that was wrong and he left. Chief Shingwak started a school in 1833. I attended it in 1941. My reserve of Walpole Island First Nation children were taken starting in 1873. And so altogether, there were 550 children of our community that went to these schools. And in my husband's family, that goes back 5 generations. In my family, only 2. The goal was to try and separate you as far away from your family and community as was possible. And so a lot of our students there were only 2 other schools in southern Ontario, and that was Brantford and Mount Elgin. So our students were sent there, but mostly up at Shingwak. Okay. And during the 40s when I went, I would say most of the students were from Walpole Island. And they stayed there. I stayed there for 12 years. They call our school Shingwak's Vision, which it was. But some people think he started residential schools, and he didn't. All he wanted was one school for his people and also the people along the Great Lakes. And that's who went to the school originally. Well, when the government got into it in 1873, they realized that would be a good process to facilitate what they had promised in the treaties and in the Indian Act, which was that they would give education to children. And so the rule was made, it was part of the Indian Act, that they could take children from 5 to 16 and put them in residential schools. And so when they took us as children, they didn't care about our age. I was 4.5 when I was taken from my home. I know people personally that were taken at 3, any age, even before that. They talk about me sitting in a high chair, which at 4.5, maybe that wasn't, I can't imagine that at 4.5, although if I had children, maybe they might be in a high chair. But that was their goal, and the goal was to kill the Indian in the child. It wasn't to educate them because we only went to school a half a day, and we had to work the other half to generate not only the funds, but also the means to have the children there at the school. The reason they did it was to get the land.
Yeah.
We didn't have paperwork to own the land. And so they figured if they would educate us, teach us their legal systems, then we would then have paperwork to say, we own this piece of property, I'm going to give it to you in a treaty. See, before that, we didn't own it. Our thinking was that the Creator gave it to us to take care of, to share it, and to always be in charge of it. But that isn't the way it worked out once they started the paperwork. So in the meantime, they thought of us as second-class citizens. The language they used to us was demeaning.
Yeah.
So they wanted to eradicate us as a people. They wanted to populate every square inch they could, and they thought they would make us farmers, which is what they were. And they believed that we were savages and could never, ever do anything other than farm or be housekeepers. Well, I was taken from my front yard. My brother and I lived on the main road right opposite the school that's there now. And we often would stand at the fence. And the people in this community always had to go somewhere else to work. So my mother was across the river in the States working. And we often would stand at the fence to wait for her. And so we were both taken. My older brother, he was taken, I never knew him. He died at the residential school. So I didn't know him, so I was taken at 4.5, and my brother was about 8. The worker is the one who would ride around the reserve and see who's out in the yard or whatever. Yeah, and just take the children. Yeah. The parents had no jurisdiction over their children. The Indian agent had the jurisdiction. And so they could take the child. And the parents couldn't do anything, or they could be jailed. Yeah. So there was no recourse for the parents. And a lot of times, if kids were taken to a school and it was full, the principal would send them to another school. So if the parents had the money, this is during the Second World War for me, if the parents had the money to visit the school and they asked where their children were, all the principal would tell them is they're not here. They wouldn't give them any more information as to where the children were. Well, I'm often asked that question. Yeah. I don't have an answer for that, because when you're a little child and you live every day the same, it turns into just another day. But I have learned from other former students, I used to be emotional support when the students were telling their experiences because they were severely physically or sexually abused, and I would sit there and provide emotional support. So they often told about what it was like for them, because some of them were older than I was at 4.5. And they said that the minute they stepped over the threshold of the school, the indoctrination started. They were separated. My brother he was taken the same day, but we got there a day apart. So if we had arrived in the same day, he would have been taken to one side and I would have been taken to the girls' side. We didn't get a chance to say goodbye or anything. And so the girls were taken down and to the basement level into the janitor's closet, and their heads were immediately shaved. And then they poured kerosene on the head because they believed that all Indians had lice. And so that kerosene stayed on for about a week. And that was often mentioned in the adjudications, how it was very demeaning, very degrading. And hair is... it's a symbol to the Aboriginal people. Mm-hmm. And so to have it cut off in one fell swoop was not, like, the children didn't understand that. And in the meantime, they're calling, if you cried or anything, they would just say, "Shut up, you dirty Indian, we've got to do this." Mm. So the demeaning language started right away. Mm. And most of us spoke Ojibwa. So we didn't know what they're saying, but you can gather just by a tone of voice. The dogs in my house can figure out whether I'm serious or not by the tone of my voice. So I'm sure the children did too. what I don't understand is that they came right in and started speaking English to us and expected us to understand what they were saying. So if they told us to sit down and we didn't sit down, we got a whack across the head. So it was constantly having to do with the language. I've been doing this about 10 years, at least 10 years. And when I go into a group, I always ask, how many of you know about residential schools? Well, most of them don't. So I have to start at the basics, awareness and education. So I never get to the impacts. So for 10 years, I've been wanting to get to the impacts. And so when I went to the University of Windsor last week, same thing. Nobody knew about residential school, but they wanted me to speak about impacts. How am I going to teach about impacts when they don't know about the system? You have to know that they shaved our hair, that they degraded us, that they whipped us, they put us in isolation. You know, a 6-foot cube, dark, no food, if we spoke our language, or if we did something that broke the rules. And family and community don't mean anything.
Right.
Yeah. And especially if you've been verbally abused and mentally abused, those are the things that are so much a part of your life that you don't think anything about them. When I came home, I didn't know what a family unit was.
Right.
I was used to living in a building with 120 kids. One thing in knowing the Lord that I think other former students don't have, because they don't know the Lord, they have that need for that, I won't say encouragement, although encouragement is part of it, that connection between other humans. And I don't have that. I feel that our emotions were seared and that we don't have the ability almost to need to hug people and need their approval for certain things. Knowing the Lord, you get all that from Him. I tell people I was a white person.
Okay, yes.
Yeah, I'm not afraid to say that. I thought like a white person. I acted like a white person. And a girl, I think she was in secondary, now post-secondary, she just asked me a couple weeks ago, were you ever ashamed to be an Indian? Which is what they taught us also.
Yeah.
And I had to answer yes. I remember being on a streetcar in Detroit, and they used to have slats on the floor where there was spaces in between the slats. And my parents would talk Ojibwa on the streetcar. It was a streetcar, not a bus. And I wanted to crawl through those slats. And now I wished I spoke Ojibwa.
Yeah.
I was leaving with mixed emotion.
Okay.
I had to be what they wanted me to be.
Yes.
And I did that. That was my method of coping. I have a picture where I'm smiling, and they made us wear Irish costumes, and I had to probably make mine, sew it. And the girl next to me, there was just two of us in the picture, and she is growling with her face. I could almost see her. So she was angry all the time. I didn't come out angry. I just came out not knowing who I was, not really thinking about it. I operated like that for the next few years till I retired and came back here. I didn't say it, it just happened.
Okay.
I retired, and it was strictly a monetary decision. I was, to be honest, I was tired of doing the work that I did, and I wanted to retire. So the state of Michigan offered a deal whereby I could retire at 55 with reduced pension, so I took it. It eventually was full pension, but by then I had decided. So it was a monetary decision, so I had to pick a place. I had a home in Michigan, but you pay property taxes on homes in Michigan. So I wanted to come back to the reserve and live here where there are no property taxes so that I could live within my pension. So I came home, and we were finishing up our house that I didn't build it. We had a builder come in, but I was the dirt shoveler, around the yard. And people would ask my husband, why is she always out there shoveling dirt? And he would say, she likes to see that pile of dirt move from one spot to the other. She feels like she's finally getting a job done. So within a year, people saw me shoveling the dirt. So within a year, I was nominated to the school board, the first ever school board here on Wapple Island. And I thought, oh, well, I don't know anyone. They won't nominate me. And so but I left my name in and I got nominated for the school board. And so that's when I started. I started, one of the jobs I had was, what does culture mean to the community of Wapple Island? And so I started asking the elders. And with all the questions that I gave them and all the answers, I still didn't find an answer that was true to me. So I just kept on going, and ever since then, I've been in a learning process. Well, being on the school board and retired, all the other members worked. So I got the jobs where I could go out in the daytime and talk to people, negotiate for certain things, all of that stuff. And so the learning was, it was coming at me hard and fast. And then I was limited to 2 terms. And so I had a year off from that, and then I was appointed to this provincial school board for this area. And so that was another learning curve there. And I enjoyed that as much as I did the school board here. So from then on, it's just, evolved into other things. Well, I think that, first of all, a Christian has to be a Christian every day, every minute. Yeah. And I find that organized religion doesn't work that way. But when I came home, the people, there's 2 methods they call here on the reserve, and probably in many communities. One is the traditional way, and the other is the Christian way. So the traditionalists live every day honoring the Creator. They get up in the morning and thank the Creator that they're alive, that they have the gift of air and heat and all the other things that the Creator gives us. So I found that very impressive, I will say, because I hadn't seen that in too many people. Yeah. But as far as and I always say, if you get a true traditionalist and a true Christian walking together, they're like that wampum belt. They have the same values. They can live with each other, honor each other, respect each other, but it's the ceremonies that separate everybody. Okay, yeah. They have the same values, and they can respect each other for it. Yeah. And they don't criticize, they don't degrade. And so I think that in itself, and you can spot the real people. The scripture says, by their fruits ye shall know them. Yeah, that's right. And you will know them. Yeah. And it isn't that you're judgmental, which is what everybody says. Oh, you're being judgmental. It isn't that at all. Each residential school was run by a church. So my school was run by the Anglican Church, and that was because we had one main church and also a church in the back part of the island. But the main church up here, mostly everybody went to it, so that's why they sent our children there to the Anglican school. So I had to attend a mini church every day during the week, morning and evening. I had to attend big church morning and evening, and those services were longer. So I had a head knowledge of what they were trying to do to me, or what they were trying to teach me. Yeah. But what they were doing to me was entirely different, and I couldn't reconcile the two. Well, when I got out of school, I felt like I was free. I lived a block away from an Anglican church, so I would go there out of habit. And it really didn't mean anything to me. I went to church. I was married in that church. And then I moved down south in the southwest of the U.S. because my husband was in the military. And people there often would come to your door and say, come to our church, come to our church, come to our church. Well, finally, somebody didn't say that. They said, can I take your children to Sunday school? And I said, sure. So they went to Sunday school. Pretty soon can Mom come with them? Sure, Mom can come with them. And I was very surprised that they studied out of the Bible. It was a Baptist church. And I used to think they were, quote unquote, holy rollers, that all they did was sing real loud and sing fast and, they would speak in tongues. And that's because I lived downtown Detroit where they had a lot of those churches. I would visit churches because it was so much a part of my life. And this one, when I started going and they studied the Bible, that interested me. So I don't know how many years it was. I didn't have any children then. I mean, I had little children, but I wasn't interested except for what we studied in Sunday school. And so I came home, and my husband was sent to Vietnam, and I lived in a little town. And we were buying a place where my husband felt he could leave me there if he got killed, like financially and everything else. So we prepared for that. And so before I moved, somebody said, go to that church on the curb there on Highway 53. So I went to the church the first Sunday I could. And there they preached the Bible more than any church that I'd ever been to. So I started going there. And it wasn't for months, maybe 5 years before the Lord really touched my heart about what was being preached. And I rebelled. It took about 8 years for me to come to know the Lord. And it was because I felt like I was okay, so to say. The church where I'd gone all my life was teaching me something. Who's going to tell me all of a sudden at the age of 35 that they were wrong? So I rebelled. When you're 16, you really don't know anything. And so what I had was a rote knowledge. I have certificates still that say Susie Kicknosway learned all her memory verses. That doesn't mean I understood them.
Right.
And so I didn't come to that personal knowledge until I was about 35. When I decided what were they trying to do to us in those schools? If they were religion-based, what were they trying to do? So that's when I went to a church that really preached the Bible, and I felt like they did. A church, not all of the rest. And so that's when I got interested, and that's when the words became real to me. I believe that everyone is put on this earth for a job. One job that they have to, not quote-unquote pay job. It's just one thing that they're put on this earth for. And I believe that God put me on this earth. He arranged all my life. He taught me things. I had jobs that are useful to me now. Everything I did in my 81 years has brought me up to today. And that's what I believe, is that the personal part of what I was taught in the church where I finally came to know the Lord, that was all for a reason. I have, like the 550 names on the monument, I would say maybe a quarter of them go to church. The rest don't. They actually hate the church. When the Lord deals with your heart, it's miraculous because you're rebellious for whatever reason. I thought I knew everything. Well, I have 6 children. My husband just died in June. We'd been married 62 years. And he was in the military. He went to Vietnam and came back. He had PTSD. And I tell you this because of all of the trauma that exists on First Nations communities, because it just never seems to end. So this happened in Michigan, but it created a home situation whereby I raised the children alone because he was in prison for 10 years. And so when I look at that trauma and all the other traumas that my people have gone through, I think that it makes impacts that people who are trying to reconcile don't even have an inkling of, and especially the intergenerational impacts. So I think that there's twice the amount of people, Native people, in the corrections system than non-Native people. And statistics like that, we're dying of diabetes implications or whatever. And so I think that, those kinds of things, people have a hard time with that word reconciliation. They don't know what to do with it. They don't know how to reconcile. Now, for myself, I think that they probably picked the wrong word. I think, to me, reconciliation is fixing something that was working in times past, and I think that it means to start a new relationship. I think that's what has to happen. And I tell the students, and they've told me back, that racism is taught at the dining room table. And they agree with me. I worked with a school in Chatham, and the teacher gave this task to her students. She said, they heard the residential school story, they studied it for almost a school year, and she asked them to make a art project depicting what they knew about residential schools. And so they invited me in so that all the students could present their projects to me. First of all, she said that was her first class ever that she got 100% participation. And all the mediums they used were so different, but the one that impacted me most, he got those little cardboard containers where cans of Pepsi are in, or other kinds of pop, and he made steps out of them to the residential school front door. And so, all he did was make the steps, and he shattered some glass so that they fell all over the steps. And he explained his work of art to me. And I was just so truly impressed with it, but his story didn't end there. When they got to talk about it, he said, my dad's a racist, and so is my grandfather. And he says, when I went home to tell him what I was learning about residential schools, my dad said, I didn't know that happened. And so he says, I think my dad will change, but I know my grandfather will never change. So that was so typical of what's happening from what we do in the schools, that I think the change is going to come with the secondary, the kids that are in secondary school now. Well, I think, and I know, this is always my first advice. You have to look at yourself. You're never going to be any good to anybody without looking at yourself first. And you have to be honest with yourself. The commission that was set about to investigate the schools is called the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. No one ever asks me what truth is. So that's the first part. You have to be honest with yourself. You have to find out your own truth. Are you really racist? Are you a bigot? And you have to be honest. I've actually thought of developing a little program to do that. Yeah. And I think, I don't know if I want to sit in the middle of a group of people who don't know how to be honest, because it can be very frustrating. And I've sat in several church groups, and I'm not there to question their Christianity. I'm just there to say, if you want to reconcile, start with yourself. What things do you do? In town, we're tax exempt, so we have to give our Indian status card to the clerk. And so they'll hand it back to me like that. You know what that tells me? That they still don't want to touch me. They don't want to touch my card. They don't want to get that lice that I might have on the card. Yeah, all of those things. So they have to look at themselves and see what they feel in their heart. And I say heart, but I don't believe a heart is an organ that pumps blood. Look at your mental part of you and see what you really are. Are you one that would hand a card back like that to me? Do you complain about me because I'm in line and taking time to get my tax exempt amount of money, even though it's 83 cents? And it isn't that we want the money, it's we're stating a fact. The treaties are still alive. And the government has an obligation for us to be tax exempt. And they've squiggled out of that by putting in the HST. And so we aren't exempt from all those taxes. And a common understanding of people in Canada is that we're tax exempt altogether, and that's not true. I pay taxes in the States where I earn my income. Then I have to exchange it into Canadian dollars and pay taxes over here. So I am not exempt from all the taxes that they think I am. See, all of those other things. So first you examine your heart, you examine yourself. what actions do you have? What do you say verbally? And, what do you do? Your body language, all of those things about yourself. Then after that, then learn about us. Read books. And there's so many books out now that you can find it on any age subject of the former students, or you can learn from psychologists, anybody. So I think that would be the second part.
Good.
And then find a niche where you belong. What did the Creator put you on this earth for? Do you speak well? Do you knit? Do you read well? Go to a First Nations school and read to kids. Anything. You have to find that niche. So you do those other 2 steps first, and then you can do the third one. Well, the one piece of advice I like to give is that anybody should not judge another person by their own values. I think you don't have that right, first of all, but people do it all the time. And it's not good. Why? Since I moved home to the reserve, I have felt more free than I have in my whole life. And what right does somebody else? I always used to tell the teachers as I brought them on the bus to the reserve for PD day, you're going to see things that you don't approve of. You might see a car in a driveway that's no longer used. You know why we do that? Because we believe that we can use those parts in the car. We all like to repurpose. That's our value, but that's not their value. Their value is throw it away in the junkyard.
Right.
Well, they're shipping all of this junk to somewhere else. They don't even have to see it. And so I believe that if you can take care of Mother Earth, that's a value that we have that I don't think exists in the Canadian population.
Yeah.